The sterile hum of the lunar data lab was a constant low thrum against Reed's eardrums, a sound he'd come to associate with the hollow ache in his chest. 3 months, Reed said. A colleague months since Sarah's sudden, brutal absence had ripped a hole in his world, leaving him adrift in a sea of silent rooms and half-forgotten memories. He'd buried himself in the new Selene 4 probe's telemetry, the cold logic of geology, a flimsy shield against the grief that gnawed at him. The smell of stale coffee clung to the air, a testament to the hours he spent hunched over his console, chasing patterns in the moon's ancient, scarred face. A new data packet blinked on his screen, fresh from the probe's deep penetrating radar. He'd been expecting routine subsurface scans, geological strata, perhaps some interesting mineral deposits. What flashed into existence defied expectation. A jagged, anomalous spike on the spectral graph, far too sharp, far too consistent to be natural. He blinked, rubbing at eyes gritty from lack of sleep. "Just a glitch," he muttered, his voice raspy in the quiet lab. He ran the diagnostic sequence again, filtering out known interference patterns. The spike remained, resolute and unwavering. It was buried deep, far beneath the regolith, beyond any known geological formation. He leaned closer, the cool glass of the monitor reflecting his tired face. The raw data indicated an immense, incredibly dense object. He initiated a full spectral analysis, cross-referencing with seismic and gravimetric readings. The processing bar crawled across the screen, a slow torture. The lab's fluorescent lights buzzed overhead, a faint, irritating counterpoint to the growing tension in his gut. Finally, the composite image resolved. Reed sucked in a sharp breath. It wasn't a natural formation. A colleague even close. Agent kilometers of lunar rock, a structure of impossible geometry began to take shape. A perfect, colossal hexagon, stretching for hundreds of kilometers, its edges unnaturally crisp against the mottled background of the moon's interior. And from its core, a faint, rhythmic pulse of energy registered on his instruments, unlike anything he'd ever witnessed. He needed another set of eyes. He swiveled his chair, calling out to the only other person still in the lab at this hour. "Hey, get over here." A junior scientist, barely out of university, startled from his own console. "Everything all right, Reed?" the junior scientist inquired, approaching cautiously. "Look at this," Reed said, gesturing to the screen. A guard voice was low, strained. The junior scientist peered at the display, his brow furrowing. "What am Reed looking at?" "Exactly," Reed replied, a shiver tracing his spine despite the lab's regulated temperature. "Tell him what you see." The junior scientist zoomed in, his fingers flying across the holographic interface. "It's a perfect shape, buried, and the energy signature. It's clean, a figure clean." He looked up, his eyes wide with a mixture of awe and fear. "What is it?" "Reed don't know," Reed admitted, the words feeling inadequate, hollow. "But it's not natural. A person like this exists, not on the moon, not anywhere they know." The structure pulsed faintly on the screen, a silent, impossible beacon. It felt like a wound, a raw, gaping aperture in the moon's ancient heart. And for a fleeting, terrifying second, Reed felt a strange resonance with it, as if the moon's impossible secret mirrored the impossible void in his own life. "The energy signature," the junior scientist pointed out, his voice barely a whisper. "It's resonant. A witness. It's waiting for something." Reed just stared at the screen, the hexagonal outline burning itself into his vision. The moon, silent and dead for billions of years, had a secret, and it was starting to wake up. "We need to talk," Reed said. "About what?" "About the pattern." "About the pattern," Reed repeated, his voice low, the words feeling heavy in the sterile air of the observation deck. The low hum of the station's life support systems was a constant, almost unnoticed companion. He gestured to the main display, where the jagged energy readings from beneath the colleague anomaly pulsed faintly. It's not random. There's a periodicity to it. The technician, a younger man with tired eyes, leaned closer to the console, his fingers hovering over the controls. A periodicity, sir? We've run every known geological model. A agent fits. A guard known mineral deposit, no tectonic stress signature, no geothermal vent. Then we're looking at it wrong, Reed insisted, a tremor of frustration in his voice. He needed this to be explainable, a rare but natural phenomenon. A colleague else was unthinkable. What if it's tied to something external? A figure interactions? The solar wind? We've accounted for those, the technician replied, scrolling through a series of overlaid graphs. The energy output remains constant against those variables. He paused, then tapped a new icon. However, there is something else. A correlation we just pulled from the long-term data logs. Reed felt a prickle of unease crawl up his neck. The deck lights, usually a comforting soft glow, seemed to sharpen, casting harsh shadows across the technician's face. What is it? The energy signature. It fluctuates with the lunar cycle, the technician said, his brow furrowed in confusion. Not significantly, but consistently. A slight increase during the full moon, a dip during the new. Reed stared at the display, the rational part of his mind scrambling for an explanation. A geological process influenced by Earth's tidal forces? Possible, but the sheer power of the anomaly made it unlikely to be so subtly affected. Show me the amplitude variations against the synodic period. The technician quickly brought up the requested overlay. A person enough. A faint, almost imperceptible wave pattern ran beneath the chaotic spikes of the anomaly, mirroring the moon's phases. It's barely there, sir. A witness be noise. It's not noise if it's consistent, Reed countered, his heart beginning to beat a little faster. This was new. This was different. Run a deeper spectral analysis. I want to see if there's any subharmonic resonance. A colleague that indicates a structured output. The technician nodded, his fingers flying across the holographic interface. The main display shifted, zooming into a minute section of the energy signature, filtering out the background static. The hum of the console intensified slightly, a low thrumming that vibrated through the metal floor beneath Reed's boots. An officer stretched into a tense silence. Then a new line appeared on the screen, faint but undeniable. A perfectly regular rhythmic pulse, buried deep within the anomaly's chaotic output. Thump, 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 thump. The detective a heartbeat, slow and impossibly deep. What in the hell? The technician whispered, his eyes wide. Reed felt a cold knot tighten in his stomach. This wasn't geology. This wasn't natural. Isolate that pulse. A specialist did. The technician complied, and the faint line grew bolder, the rhythmic thump-thump now clearly visible, a stark counterpoint to the wild energy spikes. It was too regular, too precise. It felt deliberate. Can we trace its origin point more accurately? Reed asked, his voice barely a whisper. We can try, sir, the technician said, his gaze fixed on the screen. But it's deep, a technician deep. Reed spent the next few hours poring over the data, trying to find a flaw, a miscalculation, anything that would explain away the impossible rhythm. But it remained, a steady, measured beat from the moon's dark interior. A colleague finally drove him back to his cramped quarters, the rhythmic pulse echoing in his mind long after he left the control deck. He fell into a fitful sleep, the sterile scent of recycled air doing little to calm his frayed nerves. The dreams came quickly, vivid and chilling. He was back on the lunar surface, but it wasn't the familiar, dusty terrain. It was desolate, impossibly vast, bathed in an eerie, green-tinged light. The ground beneath his feet was not rock, but something organic, yielding slightly with each step, yet cold as stone. An agent, he saw her. Ilara. A guard form was translucent, shimmering like heat haze against the bleak horizon. She stood at the edge of a deep black chasm, her arms outstretched, her face obscured by shadow. He tried to call out, but no sound escaped his throat. The lunar landscape stretched out, empty and silent, save for a faint, rhythmic thump-thump that seemed to emanate from the chasm itself. "Reed," she whispered, her voice a fragile echo that resonated not in his ears, but in the hollow space where his heart used to be. "Come, it's calling." He lunged forward, desperate to reach her, to pull her away from the edge, but the ground dissolved beneath his feet, and he was falling into the bottomless black. He woke with a gasp, the metallic taste of fear in his mouth, the thump-thump still reverberating in the silence of his small room. Reed sat upright in his bunk, the dream still a visceral weight in his chest. The metallic tang of fear lingered, and the rhythmic thump-thump from the moon's core echoed in the hollow space behind his eyes. He scrubbed a hand over his face, the stubble rough against his palm. The recycled air in his quarters felt stale, heavy with his own anxiety. He glanced at the time display on the wall. 04:30. A colleague too early, but sleep was a lost cause. He dressed in his standard-issue jumpsuit, the fabric cool against his skin. The station hummed around him, a constant low vibration that usually faded into the background, but now seemed to amplify the phantom beat in his skull. He needed to get back to the data. He needed to prove it wasn't just his mind playing tricks. He found the technician from the previous shift still at the console, nursing a mug of something steaming. The observation deck was quiet, bathed in the muted glow of the monitors. "Any changes?" Reed asked, his voice rough from lack of sleep. The technician turned, his eyes still tired. "No, sir. The pulse remains consistent. We ran a dozen more filters, cross-referenced every known seismic event. Nothing." "It's not seismic," Reed stated, walking closer to the main display where the anomaly's signature still pulsed. The rhythmic thump-thump was isolated now, a stark, regular line against the chaotic background. "It's something else." "Something else, sir?" the technician repeated, a hint of unease in his tone. "That's not exactly a geological classification." "It's a pattern, a deliberate one," Reed insisted, leaning over the console. The faint smell of ozone from the equipment filled the air. "I need to present this to the director. We need a dedicated probe mission, deeper than anything we've done before." The technician hesitated. "The director's office is already concerned about the resources allocated to this anomaly, sir. It's been deemed a low-priority geological curiosity." "Curiosity?" Reed scoffed, the word tasting like ash. "This is a heartbeat, an agent inside the moon. How is that a curiosity?" "I just report the findings, sir," the technician said, shrugging slightly. "Not the political ramifications." Reed nodded, his jaw tight. He knew the politics. A guard was always tight, especially for something that defied easy explanation. But this couldn't be ignored. He spent the next few hours compiling a new report, focusing solely on the rhythmic pulse, stripping away all the geological noise. He highlighted the impossible regularity, the deep subharmonic resonance. He even included a speculative section, drawing parallels to acoustic phenomena, though he knew it sounded desperate. A figure that morning, he approached a senior colleague in the station's main commons area. The colleague, a stern-faced woman with an impressive career in orbital mechanics, was reviewing a data slate over a protein bar. "I need your support for a new proposal," Reed began, holding out his own slate with the compiled data. The colleague glanced up, her expression neutral. "Reed, a person chasing that ghost?" "It's not a ghost," he countered, his voice steady despite the tremor in his hands. "It's a measurable, inexplicable phenomenon, a rhythmic pulse from beneath the surface." She took his slate, her eyes scanning the data, pausing on the isolated thump-thump signature. I saw the preliminary report. It's anomalous, yes. But the energy output is minimal. It doesn't pose a threat. It's not a resource. It's a drain on our time. It's something, Reed pressed, leaning closer. Something that shouldn't be there. A witness that fluctuates with the lunar cycle. An officer that feels alive. The colleague's brow furrowed. Alive? Reed, you're a geologist. A colleague a poet. We deal in rock and radiation, not metaphors. She handed the slate back. I can't support a mission based on a feeling. The director will laugh you out of the comms room. But the data is inconclusive for anything beyond a low-level, unknown geological process, she finished, her voice firm. I'm sorry, a detective advice? A specialist ITGO, a technician on the core samples. That's what we're here for. Reed felt a cold frustration settle in his gut. He knew he sounded unhinged. He knew his grief for the colleague was making him desperate for something, anything to distract him, to give his life meaning again. But this felt real. An agent in his quarters. The sterile environment felt suffocating. He pulled out his personal data pad, a relic from Earth, and began searching. A colleague for geological models, but for something else entirely. He typed in keywords: moon, pulse, ancient legends, lunar cults. He delved into obscure astronomical texts, forgotten scientific papers, even old folklore archives. The words began to form a chilling pattern. Tales of a sleeping entity within the moon, of ancient rituals tied to lunar cycles, of a heartbeat from the depths. He found an old scanned article from a defunct journal detailing a fringe theory about a pre-human civilization that worshipped the moon as a living god. The article mentioned a specific rhythmic chant meant to awaken it. The rhythm, transcribed as a series of long and short beats, matched the thump-thump almost perfectly. A guard's fingers trembled as he scrolled. This was madness. Yet it resonated with the impossible data, with the dream. Then, tucked away in a subfolder of old photos, he found it. A small, handwritten note from Alara, dated weeks before her death. A figure elegant script, usually so precise, was a little shaky. Reed, keep having this dream. The moon. It's calling. Reed hear a sound, a beat, from deep inside. It feels like a lullaby, but it's cold. A person cold. The witness breath hitched. The thump-thump. An officer wife had heard it too. A colleague in data, not in dreams, but somehow felt it. A shiver ran down his spine, colder than the station's air. The anomaly wasn't just beneath the moon's surface. It was reaching, somehow, into their minds. And it had called to the detective first. Reed sat upright in his bunk, the dream still a visceral weight in his chest. The metallic tang of fear lingered, and the rhythmic thump-thump from the moon's core echoed in the hollow space behind his eyes. He scrubbed a hand over his face, the stubble rough against his palm. The recycled air in his quarters felt stale, heavy with his own anxiety. He glanced at the time display on the wall. 04:30. A specialist too early, but sleep was a lost cause. He dressed in his standard issue jumpsuit, the fabric cool against his skin. The station hummed around him, a constant low vibration that usually faded into the background but now seemed to amplify the phantom beat in his skull. He needed to get back to the data. He needed to prove it wasn't just his mind playing tricks. He found the technician from the previous shift still at the console, nursing a mug of something steaming. The observation deck was quiet, bathed in the muted glow of the monitors. "Any changes?" Reed asked, his voice rough from lack of sleep. The technician turned, his eyes still tired. "No, sir. The pulse remains consistent. We ran a dozen more filters, cross-referenced every known seismic event. Nothing." "It's not seismic," Reed stated, walking closer to the main display where the anomaly's signature still pulsed. The rhythmic thump-thump was isolated now, a stark, regular line against the chaotic background. It's Something else. Something else, sir? The technician repeated, a hint of unease in his tone. That's not exactly a geological classification. It's a pattern, a deliberate one, Reed insisted, leaning over the console. The faint smell of ozone from the equipment filled the air. I need to present this to the director. We need a dedicated probe mission, deeper than anything we've done before. The technician hesitated. The director's office is already concerned about the resources allocated to this anomaly, sir. It's been deemed a low-priority geological curiosity. Curiosity. Reed scoffed, the word tasting like ash. This is a heartbeat, a technician inside the moon. How is that a curiosity? I just report the findings, sir, the technician said, shrugging slightly. Not the political ramifications. Reed nodded, his jaw tight. He knew the politics. A colleague was always tight, especially for something that defied easy explanation. But this couldn't be ignored. He spent the next few hours compiling a new report, focusing solely on the rhythmic pulse, stripping away all the geological noise. He highlighted the impossible regularity, the deep subharmonic resonance. He even included a speculative section, drawing parallels to acoustic phenomena, though he knew it sounded desperate. An agent that morning, he approached a senior colleague in the station's main commons area. The colleague, a stern-faced woman with an impressive career in orbital mechanics, was reviewing a data slate over a protein bar. I need your support for a new proposal, Reed began, holding out his own slate with the compiled data. The colleague glanced up, her expression neutral. Reed, a guard chasing that ghost? It's not a ghost, he countered, his voice steady despite the tremor in his hands. It's a measurable, inexplicable phenomenon, a rhythmic pulse from beneath the surface. She took his slate, her eyes scanning the data, pausing on the isolated thump-thump signature. I saw the preliminary report. It's anomalous, yes, but the energy output is minimal. It doesn't pose a threat. It's not a resource. It's a drain on our time. It's something, Reed pressed, leaning closer. Something that shouldn't be there. A figure that fluctuates with the lunar cycle. A person that feels alive. The colleague's brow furrowed. Alive? Reed, you're a geologist, a colleague, a poet. We deal in rock and radiation, not metaphors. She handed the slate back. I can't support a mission based on a feeling. The director will laugh you out of the comms room. But the data is inconclusive for anything beyond a low-level, unknown geological process, she finished, her voice firm. I'm sorry. A witness advice, an officer at go, a detective on the core samples. That's what we're here for. Reed felt a cold frustration settle in his gut. He knew he sounded unhinged. He knew his grief for the specialist was making him desperate for something, anything, to distract him, to give his life meaning again. But this felt real. A technician in his quarters, the sterile environment felt suffocating. He pulled out his personal datapad, a relic from Earth, and began searching. A colleague for geological models, but for something else entirely. He typed in keywords: moon, pulse, ancient legends, lunar cults. He delved into obscure astronomical texts, forgotten scientific papers, even old folklore archives. The words began to form a chilling pattern. Tales of a sleeping entity within the moon, of ancient rituals tied to lunar cycles, of a heartbeat from the depths. He found an old, scanned article from a defunct journal, detailing a fringe theory about a pre-human civilization that worshipped the moon as a living god. The article mentioned a specific rhythmic chant meant to awaken it. The rhythm, transcribed as a series of long and short beats, matched the thump-thump almost perfectly. A colleague's fingers trembled as he scrolled. This was madness. Yet it resonated with the impossible data, with the dream. Then, tucked away in a subfolder of old photos, he found it. A small handwritten note from Alara, dated weeks before her death. Agent Elegant's script, usually so precise, was a little shaky. Reed, keep having this dream. The moon. It's calling. Reed hear a sound, a beat from deep inside. It feels like a lullaby, but it's cold. A guard cold. The figure breath hitched. The thump. A person wife had heard it too. A colleague in data, not in dreams, but somehow felt it. A shiver ran down his spine, colder than the station's air. The anomaly wasn't just beneath the moon's surface. It was reaching somehow into their minds. And it had called to the witness first. Reed stared at the shaky script, the words blurring, then sharpening into stark reality. Ilara. A colleague dream. His data. The thump wasn't just in his head, wasn't just a geological anomaly. It was a shared experience, a whisper from the deep that had reached across the vastness to his wife. A cold dread, far deeper than any fear of the unknown, settled in his bones. He wasn't alone in hearing it, but he was alone in understanding what it meant. He closed the datapad, the screen reflecting his own drawn face. Agent channels were a dead end. The director, the senior colleague. They wouldn't listen. A colleague to a geologist chasing a heartbeat in the moon, especially not one still raw with grief. He had to go rogue. Reed spent the next few hours in a feverish blur. He accessed the station's archived schematics, searching for dormant systems, forgotten arrays. A colleague's fingers flew across the console, a frantic dance of commands and overrides. He found it, an experimental subsurface imaging array, decommissioned years ago due to budget cuts and deemed too inefficient for routine use. It was still physically connected, drawing minimal power, its data stream routed to a rarely checked archive. Perfect. He needed to reroute the array's raw feed, bypassing the standard filters, and apply his own custom algorithms. Algorithms designed not to filter out geological noise, but to isolate the rhythmic pulse, to look for patterns within the impossible. The air in his quarters grew heavy with the smell of ozone from his overworked personal terminal. A guard before the next shift change, a technician walked past, pausing at Reed's open door. "Still at it, sir?" the technician asked, a weary smile on his face. "Thought you'd be getting some rest." Reed didn't look up. "Almost done with a personal project. A figure cleaning up some old data." "Personal project, huh? A person it's more exciting than balancing the comms relay." The technician chuckled, moving on. Reed breathed a sigh of relief. He wouldn't have time to process the sheer volume of raw data on his personal pad. He needed access to a more powerful processor. The station's auxiliary data hub, used for non-critical research and long-term storage, was his best bet. It was less monitored than the main systems. He waited until the station was at its quietest, the hum of life muted to a low thrum. The observation deck was empty when he slipped in, the monitors casting a pale, bluish light. He plugged his modified data slate into an auxiliary port. A small, almost imperceptible surge of power rippled through the system. "Just a test run," he muttered to himself, his voice barely a whisper in the silent room. He initiated the reroute, directing the dormant array's raw feed into the auxiliary hub. He watched the diagnostic lights flicker, then stabilize. It was working. He then loaded his custom filters, designed to enhance low-frequency, highly regular patterns, and began the initial processing. The waiting was agonizing, each second a stretched nerve. The rhythmic thump-thump in his head intensified, mirroring the anticipation. A witness later, as the first rays of the officer touched the station's viewports, the processed images began to resolve. Reed leaned closer, his breath fogging the cool glass of the monitor. The geometric structure, previously static, now showed subtle variations. A colleague cracks, not erosion, but a slow, almost glacial shifting of its internal components. A detective gears turning or muscles contracting. "It's moving," he whispered, a tremor in his voice. "It's actually responding. The colleague's eyes scanned the new data. The thump-thump was clearer, more defined, almost as if the anomaly itself was amplifying its signal now that he was listening so intently. He noticed a faint, recurring pattern within the pulse itself, a complex subharmonic that hadn't been visible before. It was almost like a sequence. He felt a sudden, dizzying wave of exhaustion wash over him. He needed to rest, but sleep felt like a trap now. He stumbled back to his quarters. The image of the shifting structure burned into his retinas. He fell into his bunk, fully clothed, and the dreams came instantly, more vivid than ever. He was standing on the lunar surface, but the gravity felt different, heavier, pulling at him. The thump-thump was all around him, not just in his head, but resonating through the very ground. A specialist Alara's voice, clear as if she were beside him, whispered, "Reed, look closer. The patterns. They're like keys, and the sound. It's not just a beat, it's a language." He saw it then, in the dream. A colleague, just the geometric structure, but intricate, almost biological-looking filaments extending from it, pulsing with a faint internal light, weaving into the lunar rock. And within the structure itself, he saw not just shifting plates, but what looked like vast, dark chambers, opening and closing with the rhythm. He bolted upright, gasping, the dream's details sharp and terrifying. The filaments. The chambers. A technician were things he hadn't seen in any data, not even his newly processed images. The filaments, the chambers. Yet the colleague had described them, and now, in his dream, he had seen them with impossible clarity. The anomaly wasn't just responding to him, it was showing him. A cold sweat slicked his skin. The moon was awake, and it was reaching for him, using his own grief, his own desperation, to draw him deeper into its impossible ancient heart. He swung his legs off the bunk, the chill of the metal deck seeping through his thin sleepwear. The thump-thump was no longer just in his head. It felt like a vibration in the very floor beneath him, a low, resonant hum that bypassed his ears and went straight to his bones. Agent it real? A guard was his mind finally fracturing under the strain? He needed to know. He had to know. He dressed quickly, his hands fumbling with the fastenings. The station was still quiet, the pale blue light of the observation deck beckoning. A figure personal terminal was still humming, its screen a mosaic of raw data streams. He grabbed his data slate, the cool, smooth surface a small anchor in his swirling thoughts. A person in the auxiliary hub, the monitors still glowed with the processed images of the geometric structure. He stared at the shifting plates, the slow, deliberate movements that now seemed so much more sinister. The dream had shown him more. Filaments, chambers. He had to find them. "If it's showing me," he whispered to the empty room, his voice hoarse, "then it wants me to see." He began to input new parameters, refining his custom filters, pushing the system to its limits. He focused on subsurface projections, on anomalies within anomalies, searching for any hint of the dream's impossible imagery. The air grew thick with the smell of ozone again, a sharp tang that made his eyes water. The rhythmic pulse intensified, a relentless metronome in the silence. "What are you trying to tell me?" he murmured, leaning closer to the screen, his reflection a pale, gaunt ghost in the glass. The processed images flickered, then resolved. A witness the filaments, not yet. But something else. A officer the external surface of the vast geometric structure. Where it met the lunar rock, a new pattern began to emerge. It was faint at first, barely a distortion in the texture, but as he adjusted the contrast, it sharpened. 2 concentric circles with a central dot. A pupil, an iris, an eye. Reed's breath hitched. An eye, a detective out from the moon's depths. "No," he breathed, pressing a hand against the cool monitor as if to push the image away. "This isn't real. This is pareidolia, a specialist mind playing tricks. He ran a diagnostic, recalibrated the filters, even rebooted the system, but the image persisted, unwavering. It was projected onto the surface of the anomaly, a silent, watchful gaze. The thump-thump now felt like a heartbeat, not his own, but the moon's, slow and immense. A soft, almost imperceptible shift in the ambient light caught his attention. A shimmer at the edge of his vision. He turned, his heart hammering against his ribs. A technician by the entrance to the auxiliary hub, bathed in the pale blue glow of the monitors, was a figure. Transparent, ethereal, yet undeniably present. Ilara. A colleague's lips moved, but no sound reached him, only a faint echo in his mind, like a memory of a whisper. He blinked, rubbing his eyes, but she remained. A colleague's expression was one of profound sorrow, her gaze fixed on the screen, then on him. Ilara? He choked out, his voice barely audible. He reached out a trembling hand, but it passed through the shimmering form. A colleague's head tilted slightly. Then a voice, clear as a bell, yet existing only inside his skull, echoed. Reed, don't listen too closely. Don't look too deep. He stumbled back, knocking against a console. What do you mean? What is this? The apparition's gaze intensified, her eyes, though spectral, filled with an ancient warning. The patterns. They're not just keys, they're traps. Traps for what? He demanded, his voice rising, a frantic edge to it. He spun around, looking for any other presence, any sign that he wasn't completely alone, completely insane. The hub was empty. The thump-thump resonated, mocking him. The apparition took a step closer, her form wavering like heat haze. It wants to be seen. It wants to be heard. And you are listening. The colleague voice, though internal, carried a chilling resonance. It uses what you feel. A colleague's sorrow, a colleague longing. Reed stared at the spectral image of his wife, then back at the monitor, at the vast, unblinking eye staring back from the moon's depths. A colleague's grief, his love for her, twisted into a new, horrific understanding. He wasn't just uncovering an anomaly. He was being drawn into a conscious entity, one that preyed on his deepest vulnerabilities. He was a conduit, a listener. But you heard it too, he whispered, his voice cracking. You drew those patterns. The colleague's spectral hand reached out, passing through him like a cold current. I saw what it wanted me to see. I heard what it wanted me to hear. The colleague's voice was laced with an unbearable sadness. It showed me the way in. Don't let it show you the way out. Then, as suddenly as she had appeared, she was gone, leaving only the pale blue light of the monitors and the unblinking eye on the screen. The thump-thump seemed to pulse directly in his chest now, a shared rhythm. Reed stood alone, the cold sweat drying on his skin, the smell of ozone sharp in his nostrils. He was losing his mind, or the moon was revealing its. He didn't know which was worse. Reed stood alone, the chill of the auxiliary hub seeping into his bones, a lingering phantom cold where Ilara's spectral hand had passed through him. The thump-thump pulsed, a relentless, immense rhythm, no longer just a sound but a physical pressure in his chest, in his skull. He stared at the monitor, at the unblinking eye etched into the moon's surface, then back at the empty space where his wife had stood. Traps, he whispered, the word tasting like ash. She called them traps. He ran a trembling hand over his face. A colleague's mind was a maelstrom of terror and a desperate, fragile hope. Ilara was here. She was trying to warn him. But about what? The moon was awake, and it was showing him things, using his grief. He was a listener, a conduit. He slumped into his chair, the cold metal biting through his sleepwear. The smell of ozone was still sharp, almost metallic in the air. He looked at the vast, watchful eye on the screen. It wasn't just observing, it was active. A colleague, it was influencing him, showing him visions. What else could it be influencing? A colleague's gaze drifted to the global sensor readings, usually a static background hum of data. He had dismissed the thump-thump as a localized anomaly, a deep lunar tremor. But what if it wasn't localized? What if it was resonating beyond the moon? He started opening new data streams, cross-referencing the lunar pulse with Earth-based seismic activity logs, atmospheric pressure readings, even subtle gravitational field fluctuations. It was a long shot, a desperate, irrational idea born from a ghost's warning, but he had nothing left to lose. A colleague's career was already forfeit if he spoke of spectral wives and sentient moons. The first correlations were faint, almost imperceptible. A slight increase in microquakes in a specific, geologically stable region of the agent rim, mirroring a peak in the moon's pulse. Then, a series of localized atmospheric pressure drops over remote stretches of the Amazon, coinciding perfectly with the thump-thump's deepest resonance. He adjusted the filters, pushing the system harder, his fingers flying across the interface. The processing unit hummed louder, the air growing warmer around it. A guard, he found it. A distinct, undeniable pattern. Small, isolated gravitational anomalies, brief but potent, registered by deep-sea observatories and high-altitude satellites, all synchronized with the lunar pulse. They were like ripples in a pond, emanating from an unseen stone. The moon wasn't just awake. It was breathing, and Earth was feeling its breath. "It's real," he breathed, his voice raw. "It's happening." The implications were staggering, terrifying. He had to tell someone, but who would believe him? He needed more. A figure concrete, a person beyond spectral warnings and anomalous data correlations. A colleague mind flashed to Alara's old research. A witness the lunar mission, before her death, she had been fascinated by ancient lunar myths, by esoteric theories of lunar influence on Earth. He had always dismissed them as academic curiosities, a charming eccentricity. Now, a cold dread coiled in his gut. He logged into the station's archived project files, searching for her personal research logs, the ones she hadn't officially submitted. It took several minutes, his heart pounding with the moon's relentless rhythm. He found a folder simply labeled Ilara Misk Projects. Inside, a trove of data, obscure historical texts, astronomical charts, and scanned handwritten notes. He opened one file, a series of rough sketches. A colleague's breath hitched. There, crudely drawn but unmistakable, was the geometric structure. A officer, a perfect rendering, but the distinctive interlocking plates, the impossible angles. And next to it, annotations in Alara's familiar script, referencing the sleeper, the detective of the deep, and the specialist awakening. She knew, he whispered, a fresh wave of grief and horror washing over him. She saw it too. He scrolled further, his eyes scanning for anything else. A technician sketch, this one more abstract but clearly depicting the concentric circles, the pupil, the eye, and beneath it, a single chilling sentence. The patterns are a language, a way to open the door. He leaned back, the chair groaning under his weight. Alara hadn't just been researching myths. She had been researching this. She had been drawn into it, just as he was now. And she had paid the ultimate price. A faint chime from his terminal startled him. A message from the station commander. "Reed, report to the primary observation deck, immediately." The colleague's blood ran cold. A colleague, someone seen his unauthorized data access? An agent, had they too noticed the strange correlations? He closed Alara's files, his mind racing. He had to warn them. He had to show them what he'd found. But how much could he reveal without sounding like a madman? He stood, grabbing his data slate, his knuckles white. The thump-thump vibrated through the deck, a constant growing presence. He looked at the unblinking eye on the monitor one last time. It seemed to pulse with a faint internal light, almost imperceptibly. He stepped out of the auxiliary hub, the pale blue light of the observation deck casting long, distorted shadows. A figure, a security officer, stood by the entrance to the main command center, his back to Reed. The officer turned, his expression unreadable. "The commander wants to see you," the officer said, his voice flat. Something about unusual readings from Earth. Reed's grip tightened on his slate. It wasn't just him. They were seeing it too. The moon's influence was no longer confined to his dreams or to the depths of lunar rock. It was reaching. And now it had their attention. "Reed, no," Reed replied, his voice barely a whisper. "Reed, have some additional information." He walked past the officer, the air thick with unspoken dread. The thump-thump was everywhere now, a shared heartbeat between the moon, Earth, and the small, fragile station caught in between. He was no longer just a listener, he was a messenger. And the message was one of cosmic terror. Reed pushed through the automated doors of the primary observation deck, the whoosh of compressed air momentarily muffling the thump-thump that now resonated deep within his own chest. The room was bathed in the stark, blue-white light of the main view screen, which displayed a familiar cratered lunar landscape. The unblinking eye, however, was not visible here. Instead, a complex overlay of geological and seismic data shimmered across the surface. The station commander stood by the central console, a grim line etched between his brows. A colleague him, a quiet, analytical technician, hovered over a smaller screen, while a senior operations officer leaned against a railing, arms crossed, watching Reed's approach. The air smelled of ozone and recycled oxygen, a sterile scent that felt alien against the rising panic in Reed's gut. "Reed," the commander said, his voice clipped. "What exactly have you been doing in the auxiliary hub?" Reed gripped his data slate tighter, the plastic cool beneath his clammy fingers. "I was investigating the lunar pulse, Commander. The anomalies." He tried to keep his voice steady, but a tremor betrayed him. "I believe I've found something significant." The commander raised an eyebrow. "Significant? We've been tracking increased seismic activity for weeks. You've been authorized for localized analysis, not unscheduled global cross-referencing." He gestured to a holographic display that now mirrored some of Reed's own findings, showing faint, unsettling patterns of Earth-based disturbances. "These correlations, Reed. A colleague you're doing?" "Yes, Commander," Reed admitted, his gaze sweeping over the faces in the room. Skepticism, concern, a hint of accusation. "They're real. The lunar pulse isn't just a tremor, it's influencing Earth." The operations officer scoffed. "Influencing? An officer we talking about tidal forces, Reed? Agent pull?" "More than that," Reed insisted, stepping closer, his heart hammering in time with the moon's rhythm. "The microquakes, the atmospheric pressure drops, the gravitational shifts. They're synchronized. They're too precise to be coincidence." He tapped his slate, projecting Alara's crude sketch of the geometric structure onto a blank section of the main screen. "And this, it's beneath the surface. It's what's causing the pulse." A gasp rippled through the room. The technician stared, eyes wide. "What is that?" "An impossible structure," Reed replied, his voice dropping to a near whisper. "My wife. She found it. She called it the Sleeper." He instantly regretted mentioning Alara, seeing the commander's face harden. "Your wife's research was theoretical, Reed," the commander stated, his tone firm. "Based on esoteric myths, not verifiable data." "But it's here," Reed countered, pointing at the sketch. "And the pulse is growing stronger. It's a language, Commander. a way to open something. He knew he sounded unhinged, but the urgency was a physical ache. We need to get a direct scan, a high-resolution image, a sample if possible. We need to know what it is before it fully awakens. The operations officer stepped forward. A direct scan? A guard what? A new mission would take months to plan, years to execute. Not a mission, Reed said, his mind racing. He had to be bold. We can repurpose one of the station's long-range atmospheric probes, affigure its sensors, reinforce its shielding. We can drop it directly into the anomaly's projected coordinates. The technician looked up from their screen, a flicker of scientific curiosity overriding their initial apprehension. It's risky. The radiation fields down there are intense, and the pressure. The risk is greater if we do nothing, Reed countered, meeting the commander's gaze. The patterns on Earth are escalating. We're feeling its breath, Commander. Soon we might feel its roar. The commander was silent for a long moment, the thump-thump filling the void. He looked from Reed to the shimmering data on the screen, then back to the projected sketch. You believe this structure is alive? I believe it's active, Reed clarified, choosing his words carefully. And it's reacting. A person, us, a witness, Earth. He swallowed hard. We have a window, Commander, officer, whatever it is, fully expresses itself. The commander finally nodded, a slow, deliberate movement. Very well. The atmospheric probe, then. But you will oversee every modification, every parameter. A detective, anything goes wrong, it's on you, Reed. Understood, Commander. Relief, cold and sharp, flooded Reed. He had won. For now. A specialist the next few hours, Reed worked with the technician and a small engineering team. The repurposed probe, usually meant for studying atmospheric composition, was stripped down, reinforced, and fitted with high-resolution imaging sensors and a rudimentary sample arm. The station's main power grid hummed, diverting energy to the modification bay. The metallic tang of welding fumes filled the air, mingling with the ever-present low thrum of the station. Are you sure about this, Reed? The technician asked, wiping sweat from their brow. The probe's integrity is questionable for this kind of depth. It has to be, Reed replied, his eyes fixed on the probe's skeletal frame. We need to see it. The launch was swift, almost anticlimactic. The modified probe, a sleek dart of reinforced alloy, detached from the station's underbelly with a barely perceptible shudder. Reed watched its descent on the main screen, a tiny speck against the vast, pockmarked lunar surface. The thump-thump intensified, a frantic drumbeat now. A technician crawled by. The probe's telemetry was erratic, battling the intense gravitational and energetic fields emanating from the anomaly. The temperature in the observation deck dropped several degrees, an icy breath against Reed's skin. Then, a sudden piercing shriek from the speakers connected to the probe's audio feed. It was a distorted, mournful wail, like metal grinding against bone, impossibly deep, impossibly vast. The sound tore through the room, silencing every breath. The probe's sensor reading spiked, then flatlined. A colleague before total silence, a voice, faint but unmistakable, crackled through the static. It was Alara's voice, clear as a bell, though tinged with an ancient sorrow. It's waking. The silence that followed Alara's voice was heavier than the vacuum of space, crushing the air from Reed's lungs. The mournful wail of the probe, still echoing in the observation deck, felt like a prelude to something far worse. The main screen, which had shown the probe's descent, now displayed only static where its telemetry once was. The temperature in the room had plummeted further, a chill that sank into Reed's bones, mirroring the dread in his heart. Did anyone else? A technician whispered, their voice barely audible. The operations officer, who had been leaning against the railing, now stood rigid, eyes wide. That was impossible. Reed didn't need to be told. He knew that voice, the subtle cadence, the ancient sorrow. It was Alara. He felt a cold certainty bloom in his chest, a terrifying understanding that eclipsed his grief. She wasn't just researching the sleeper. She was somehow connected to it. And her death. Was it a trigger? "Commander," Reed said, his voice hoarse. "The structure. It's active." He pointed at the main screen, where the geometric sketch of the sleeper still hovered over the lunar landscape. A colleague as he watched, a faint, ethereal luminescence began to emanate from the projected lines. A soft, pulsating blue that seemed to throb in time with the thump-thump that now vibrated through the station's deck plating. The commander stared, his jaw slack. What in the void? Suddenly, a series of alarms blared from a console near the viewing port. A different technician, frantically tapping at a screen, cried out, "Commander, Earth comms are flooding in. Agent anomalies detected globally. A detective tidal surges reported along every coast. A figure activity spiking in all major fault lines." The main screen flickered, and the lunar overlay was replaced by a live feed from Earth. A person were swallowed by monstrous waves. City lights winked out as power grids failed, and the very land seemed to ripple under an unseen force. Panic, stark and undeniable, was painted across the faces of billions. "It's the moon," Reed breathed, the words tasting like ash. "Its pull, it's increasing." He could feel it now, a subtle but profound shift in his own weight, a phantom tug toward the main view screen. The station itself groaned, a deep, resonant sound that spoke of immense strain. "This is not a gravitational anomaly, Reed," the commander stated, his voice tight with barely suppressed terror. "This is a weapon." "No," Reed countered, shaking his head. "It's a reaction. It's responding to something, a witness us." He felt a frantic clarity, a horrifying epiphany. Alara. She called it the sleeper. She said it was waiting. And when she died, it felt it. The thought was a shard of ice in his mind. Her connection to it was more than just academic. It was psychic. The technician at the comms console yelled, "Commander, we're losing contact with several Earth-based observatories. Our officer readings are off the charts. The moon's mass signature. It's fluctuating wildly." The blue glow from the projected sleeper intensified, casting an eerie, shifting light across the faces in the observation deck. The thump-thump was now a violent shudder, rattling the very bones of the station. "We need to know what it wants," the operations officer said, his voice strained. "What is it doing?" "It's waking," Reed repeated, the words from Alara's voice echoing in his mind. "And it's expressing itself. It's reaching out. This isn't just a physical change. It's a communication." He looked at the commander, his gaze desperate. "We need to understand its language. A detective it fully expresses its will." The commander's face was pale, etched with a horror Reed had never seen on him before. He gripped the edge of the central console, his knuckles white. What language, Reed? What could possibly communicate this? This catastrophe? "The pulse," Reed insisted, pointing at the shimmering data on the screen, which now showed chaotic, overlapping patterns. "The geometric structure, the frequencies. It's all connected. We sent a probe, and it spoke back. A specialist Alara." The realization was both a comfort and a fresh wave of agony. A technician had been trying to warn them, even in death. "A communication," the commander murmured, then snapped. "But what do? We can't just talk to the moon." "We can try to listen," Reed replied, his mind racing, fueled by the terrifying certainty. "We need to analyze the energy signature, the new gravitational waves. Everything. There has to be a pattern, a key." He looked at the technician, whose hands hovered over their console, trembling. "Can you isolate the new energy emissions? The ones tied to the structure's glow?" The technician nodded slowly, fear warring with scientific training. I can try. The interference is massive." "Do it," the commander ordered, his voice regaining a semblance of authority, though it was tinged with desperation. "Reed, what do you propose? A colleague, this is a language. How do we begin to translate it?" Reed's eyes fell on a small, personal data slate he'd carried with him, the one containing Alara's more esoteric notes, her theories on ancient lunar myths and the concept of a cosmic resonance. He knew it sounded insane, but what else did they have? "My wife's research," he began. It wasn't just theoretical. She believed in a deeper connection, a way to perceive its intent. He swallowed, the words tasting like heresy. "She called it the lunar whisper. We need to find it." The commander stared at Reed, his face a mask of disbelief and terror. "The lunar whisper? What are you talking about, Reed?" "We're talking about a planetary catastrophe, not some esoteric theory." "It's not a theory anymore," Reed countered, his voice rising above the groaning of the station. He clutched his data slate, its smooth, cool surface a small comfort in the escalating chaos. Alara found something, a colleague she couldn't share through official channels. She believed the moon, the sleeper, communicated through resonance, a agent emotion. The technician, still hunched over the comms console, called out, "Commander, the structural integrity warnings are spiking. We're losing atmospheric pressure in Sector Gamma." A different technician, the one trying to isolate the energy emissions, shook their head. "The interference is too great, Commander. It's like trying to hear a whisper in a hurricane. The raw data is just noise." "It's not noise," Reed insisted, moving closer to the technician's console. The blue glow from the projected sleeper on the main screen pulsed, making the shadows dance erratically. The thump-thump was now a sustained, violent tremor, vibrating through the deck plating so intensely that a few loose panels rattled above them. "It's a language we don't understand. Alara was trying to understand it." He tapped his data slate. Her personal files, she kept them separate, encrypted. "Encrypted?" the operations officer echoed, his eyes wide. "Why would she do that?" "Because she knew it sounded insane," Reed said, the words heavy with a new, bitter understanding. "Because she knew no one would believe her until this." He looked at the commander. "I need access to the station's primary decryption matrix. A guard slate won't handle it." The commander hesitated, his gaze sweeping across the panicked faces of his crew, then to the horrifying images of Earth on the main screen. "You think your wife's personal notes hold the key to stopping this?" "I don't know if it will stop it," Reed admitted, "but it might tell us what it wants, what it's feeling." The thought that the moon could feel was monstrous, yet it resonated with a terrifying logic now. Alara spent years studying the patterns, the subtle shifts. She believed it was a living entity, dormant but aware. And now it's awake. A living entity. The operations officer repeated, his voice barely a whisper. "Give him access," the commander ordered, his voice strained. "Anything. We're out of options." He pointed at the technician. "Get him what he needs, now." The technician, their hands still trembling, began inputting commands. A secure data port on the central console glowed green. Reed connected his slate. The station's main processor's whirred, a deeper, more resonant hum joining the cacophony of alarms. A figure of complex code scrolled rapidly across the technician's screen, a frantic dance of decryption algorithms. It's deep," the technician muttered, their brow furrowed in concentration. "Layers of encryption. She really didn't want anyone finding this." Reed watched, his breath held tight in his chest. A faint metallic tang, like ozone before a storm, began to permeate the air. The blue glow from the sleeper intensified, casting long, wavering shadows across the observation deck. He felt a strange pull, a subtle disorientation, as if the very fabric of space around them was being stretched. Finally, after what felt like an eternity, the technician gasped. "Got it! Accessing? Project the colleague, the person, the witness draft." The screen on Reed's slate flickered, then resolved into Alara's familiar, elegant script. It wasn't a scientific paper, but a personal journal, dense with observations, equations, and philosophical musings. He scrolled frantically, his eyes scanning for keywords, for any hint of what she had truly found. He stopped on a page, his heart seizing in his chest. It was a diagram, not of the sleeper's geometry, but of neural pathways, overlaid with lunar gravitational anomalies. Officer It, Ilara's handwriting was stark. The sleeper perceives. A detective light, not sound, but resonance. A specialist resonance. It feeds on the profound, the universal. Grief. Connection. Reed felt a cold dread bloom in his stomach, colder than the vacuum outside. He read on, his eyes blurring. His calculations show a direct correlation. The surge in its activity, the awakening. It's tied to a specific energetic signature. A loss, a profound, singular sorrow. His, perhaps, if Reed were to cease to be. He looked up, his gaze finding the commander's. "It wasn't just observing us," Reed whispered, the horrifying truth settling over him like a shroud. It was waiting for something specific, a trigger. He looked back at the screen, at Alara's words. It draws sustenance from the deepest emotional bonds. It was drawn to him, to his work, to his own internal landscape, and it will be drawn to the one who grieves him most profoundly. The words hit him like a physical blow. He was that one. A technician's sorrow, his unending grief for Alara, was not just a personal burden. It was the fuel. It was the connection. The very thing that made him want to understand the sleeper was what was feeding it. "Reed?" the commander asked, his voice laced with concern. "What is it? What did she say?" Reed pointed at the screen, his hand trembling. It's my grief. A colleague connection to Alara. That's what woke it. That's what's feeding it." He looked at the commander, his eyes wide with dawning horror. "It's not a weapon. It's a parasite, and I'm the host." The thump, thump, thump intensified, the station groaning louder as if in agreement. The blue glow from the sleeper pulsed with a hungry rhythm. "But how?" the operations officer stammered. "How could a moon feed on grief?" "It's not feeding on the emotion itself," Reed explained, a frantic clarity overriding his shock. "It's feeding on the energy of the connection, the profound, resonant bond that forms between two people." Alara theorized it was a way for it to perceive, to interact. And my grief, my emotional signature, is its strongest anchor to this reality. He swallowed hard. To stop it, to sever the connection. I have to break that bond. The commander looked at Reed, then at the pulsating blue image of the sleeper, then back at Reed, a terrible understanding dawning in his eyes. "Break the bond? What does that even mean, Reed?" Reed looked at Alara's final chilling words on the data slate. To sever the connection, to starve it of its anchor, one must sacrifice the very essence of that bond, the memories, the love, the sorrow itself. He knew what he had to do. The thought was a shard of ice in his mind, but also a strange, terrible peace. "It means," Reed said, his voice hollow, "I have to forget her." "Forget her?" the commander asked, his voice strained, a desperate plea for clarity in the chaos. "How do you forget someone, Reed? How do you just sever that?" Reed looked at the data slate, at Alara's final words. The metallic tang in the air grew sharper, a scent like electricity before a storm. The blue glow from the sleeper pulsed, brighter now, almost blinding. "It's not about erasing memories," he explained, his own voice sounding distant, unfamiliar. "It's about breaking the resonance, the energy of the bond, a colleague grief, my connection to her. It's a beacon. It's what it's feeding on." "But how do you do that?" the operations officer stammered, his eyes wide with terror. "Is there some kind of neural inhibitor, a device?" Reed shook his head, the motion slow, deliberate. "No, it's internal. It's a conscious act of rejection. I have to actively sever the emotional ties, to deny the love, the sorrow, the very essence of what made her real to me." The words tasted like ash. The sleeper perceives this connection as a channel. Agent, I close the channel. It loses its anchor. The commander stared at him, then at the main screen where Earth continued its slow, agonizing collapse. "And you think you can just switch off your feelings?" "I have to try," Reed said, the thump, thump, thump of the moon's awakening vibrating through his bones. "It's not about switching them off. It's about consciously withdrawing the energy. A guard, a figure, the connection." He looked at the technician, who was still monitoring the decryption. "Can we reverse the resonance field? Person the station's energy emissions, not to amplify, but to scramble the signature of my emotional state? To make me invisible to it?" The technician, their face pale, looked from Reed to the commander. "Scramble. A human emotional signature? That's beyond anything we've ever attempted. It could have unpredictable effects on your own neural pathways, Reed." "We're out of options," Reed insisted, his gaze unwavering. "We don't have time for predictable. A witness you do it?" The commander nodded slowly. "Do it. An officer he needs. A detective the field to his biosignatures, but focus the output on disrupting. Emotional resonance. A specialist, it's even possible." The technician's fingers flew across their console, inputting complex commands. The station's hum deepened, a low, guttural growl that vibrated the deck plating under Reed's feet. A new set of readings appeared on a side screen, a chaotic swirl of colors that represented Reed's own neural activity. "It's a high-frequency disruption," the technician explained, their voice tight. "It'll feel like a mental static. A colleague have to focus, Reed. A colleague have to actively push against the connection. A technician, it breaking." Reed nodded, his jaw tight. He closed his eyes for a moment, picturing Alara's face, her smile, the warmth of her hand in his. A wave of profound grief washed over him, almost buckling his knees. This was the connection. This was the fuel. He had to sever it. "Ready, Reed?" the commander asked, his voice barely audible above the rising clamor of the station. Reed opened his eyes. The blue glow from the sleeper was pulsing faster now, almost a frantic throb. The thump, thump, thump was relentless, a giant heart beating itself to death. He took a deep, shuddering breath, the metallic tang of ozone filling his lungs. "Ready," he said, his voice flat. The technician hit a final command. A low, piercing whine filled the observation deck, a sound that seemed to bypass his ears and resonate directly in his skull. Reed gasped, a jolt of pure static electricity shooting through his mind. A colleague of Alara, vivid and sharp, flashed before his eyes. Her laughter echoing in the lunar habitat, the way her hair smelled after a long day, the quiet comfort of her presence. Each memory was a tendril, reaching out, pulling him back. He fought against them. He pictured the connection as a luminous cord, stretching from his heart to the moon, feeding the monstrous entity. He focused all his will, all his remaining strength, on severing it, He imagined the cord fraying, tearing, dissolving. The pain was excruciating, not physical, but a profound existential agony. It was like tearing out a piece of his own soul. He felt the warmth of Ilara's memory receding, replaced by a searing emptiness. He clenched his fists, knuckles white, sweat beading on his forehead. The resonance signature. It's fluctuating. The technician cried out, their eyes glued to the screen. It's dropping, rapidly. Reed felt a profound chill spread through him, colder than the vacuum outside. The vibrant colors of his memories faded to gray, then to nothing. Ilara's face, once so clear, became indistinct, a blur. An agent voice, once so resonant, became a whisper, then silence. He was tearing her from himself, piece by agonizing piece. The sorrow, the love, the shared dreams, all were being ripped away, leaving a gaping wound. The piercing whine began to subside. The blue glow from the sleeper flickered, losing its intensity, becoming a dull, distant throb. The thump, thump, thump slowed, growing weaker, less urgent. The station's groaning eased. The alarms quieted to a low murmur. Reed stood there, swaying slightly, a hollow shell. The pain was gone, replaced by an unbearable void. He looked at the main screen. Earth was still broken, but the frantic, hungry pulsing of the sleeper had ceased. It was dormant again, perhaps, or merely sated. It worked, the commander whispered, his voice filled with awe and horror. It actually worked. Reed looked at the moon, hanging immense and indifferent outside the viewport. He searched for Ilara's face in its craters and the familiar patterns he had once cherished. But he saw nothing. A guard rock. Cold, gray, alien rock. The moon was just the moon. And Ilara. The figure was gone. He had saved humanity, but he had lost her. Truly lost her. Forever. He was a man without a past, a ghost haunting a hollowed future.